hope it works. If not, then we'll have to redo the entire episode. I'll start. I'll post to Twitter later.
Okay.
All right. We are here in a different set of circumstances. I'm sure if you usually watch the live stream, this is not quite live. And if you typically listen to the podcast, at least as of the last year-ish or so, this is an unfamiliar voice, at least on a weekly basis, for how this episode is starting. But we are here, Hoosier Nation, our 231st episode of the Hoosier Sound, the official podcast of Indiana HQ. My name is Noah Freeman. We are throwing it back to OG days. Matt Lukens is here. Tuesday, December 21st. We are recording a pre-holiday show for everyone, right in between, right at the very end of our non-conference play for basketball. So we're going to talk about a bunch of basketball-related things today, but we're here, we're going. It's a little different. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. No, it's nice to have you back, of course. Throwing it back. Now, if you're really throwing it back, the other Noah would also be here, but that is for the like old time. Yeah, there's like 3 people that understand that reference. But yeah, I'm excited to have you, of course. I mean, you're still live in HQ chat and Slack and the rest, and so still involved, of course. But yeah, I mean, and Christmas is right around the corner too, so it's an early Christmas present. Get to say hi to you. So
yeah, very true. We got just this week we're going into stuff, but we're going to talk about what are we talking about today? We're talking about the Notre Dame game. We're going to talk about all of the various sporting activities that are getting halted and paused over the last couple of days or so, and hopefully that doesn't affect Hoosier Nation. And then we're going to wrap up with, we got a little bit of Northern Kentucky, so hopefully some of you are listening to this podcast before the Northern Kentucky game. If not, you got a few days at least to spend some time with some family before the final non-conference game, and then we can finally ramp up to the conference situation for the Hoosiers. But a few days ago, Crossroads Classics, the final Crossroads Classic, in which they couldn't Banker's Life. Now the old name of Banker's Life, couldn't they have waited just like a little longer to just say, hey, you could do all of it in Banker's Life, and then
move on to a different stadium game.
Right, yeah. So Crossroads Classic, the Hoosiers defeat Notre Dame 64-56 to go and have a 9-2 overall record leading into the holidays. It was up and down game to say the least. But what were your opening thoughts, Matt, as we're getting into this? What was your overall take, at least coming away with a win against Notre Dame, the first win away from Assembly Hall?
That's true. It is Mike Woodson's first win that is in Assembly Hall, so congratulations to Coach Woodson on that. Hopefully he gets an away win here soon at Penn State Big Ten play, but we'll talk about that next week. Original thoughts. I just remember a very slow first half where the guys decided that it was Christmas vacation and they were going to play like they were on Christmas vacation, especially the offense for the first, I want to say like 15 to 16 minutes. And then they picked it up towards the end of the second half, closed with a nice run, closed with a lead, 30 to 27 at the half, and then obviously won the game 64-56, though I feel like the final score was not indicative of how close this game was, as Notre Dame brought it and tied it with about 5 to 6 minutes left in the game. But I was very proud of the guys for toughing this one out, even though we had some people that were ice cold, Xavier Johnson, and shorthanded without Tamar Bates, who was a late scratch due to a funeral or death in the family. He was at a funeral, and then also without who are we at? Trey Galloway.
Well,
still
right.
So,
yeah, and then
so down 2 scholarship players against a Notre Dame team that was supposed to be pretty okay.
Mhm.
I'm glad that we ended up toughing out a win.
Yeah, and Jordan Geronimo as well kind of was limited after a few minutes himself. So really, this was also the first game going into some of those injuries that we saw a smaller rotation of players because
Yeah.
it hasn't been quite the 5-and-5 the platoons like we saw Kentucky do a few years ago, but it's been relatively similar, that NBA style that everyone has talked about, of course, where there's more of the starters and then the backups and they're more full team. But I think the last game or two we've seen a little bit of that taken away, and now that could be some of the injuries. But if you take out the 4 minutes that Jordan Geronimo had and the 2 minutes that Michael Durr had, there's only
Yeah.
7 people that really played in this game, which is very different from the rest of what we've seen, which with the first 11 games for Coach Woodson. So it was quite interesting to see how everything turned out, especially when you've got someone like Xavier Johnson going cold, at least
Yeah.
definitely in the second half, to
Yeah.
say the least, and like where you're gonna lean on for all these players. Uh, and I get no surprise now that you're going to go, you're not going to go as deep into the bench. 4 out of the 5 starters scored in double digit figures, and
Yeah.
were able to lead some of the Hoosiers to that first win away from home, which was super important because you've got like the Wisconsin road game, of course, was a loss. The Syracuse road game was a loss, and that was the only time that the Syracuse game, besides Notre Dame, that was the only time that the Hoosiers were going to be playing away from Assembly Hall in the non-conference. So you needed it for sure. And bracketology, I know a lot of the bracketologists were talking about how this wasn't really helpful for Indiana getting the victory, but a loss definitely would have hurt them in
Yeah.
the end. So they at least skate by with a victory. Now let's turn our attention, since we talked a little bit about Xavier Johnson, and we'll talk about the guard play, since the guard play is definitely I feel like that's where a lot of these minutes came from, because we've had,
Yep.
of course, Johnson and P. Stew playing 30 plus minutes, but then you had Leal coming off for 16, which is at least the last couple of games average for him, but on the higher side for his career so far. And then Rob Finney with about 25, which is a good amount of minutes for him so far. But what did you see from some of the guard play, the more important roles that's going to kind of keep this team going?
Yeah, I mean, college basketball is a guard-centered game. Obviously, good teams have good guards. Xavier Johnson is a good guard, and I want IU fans to realize this. He's been frustrating, to say the least. Some of his performances throughout the year, you can probably blame both losses almost squarely on Xavier Johnson's shoulders. The way he played down the stretch at Wisconsin, the way he fouled out at Syracuse, not great. Not somebody a experienced point guard can do, or not something an experienced point guard can do. However, that being said, his assist to turnover ratio and his assist average is fantastic. He not his turnover ratio, but his ability to create baskets is something we haven't had since Yogi, and something that is vital for this team. So even if he does go 2 of 9 from 3 like he did this game, I'm still would much rather have him out there over Finney. Now, the problem with our team is point guard play, which surprise, I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody that's watched this team over the last couple of years. That has been the problem. The one of the bright spots for this team has been Parker Stewart and Miller Kopp playing that kind of 2, 3, 4 position, where they have looked great. Now Miller again was 2 of 7 on field goals in this game, which I don't remember, but I feel like every time he shoots it, it's going to go in, so I don't mind it. And Parker Stewart was 3 of 4, including 3 of 4 from 3, which we will take every day of the week. They have been fantastic. Anthony Leal, when he's come in, has played fantastic. Trey Galloway, when he was healthy, played fantastic. Tamar Bates, when he comes in, plays fantastic. It's the point guards that have been a problem. There have been people asking for Lander to come in, and I would say that given the performances that Finney and Xavier Johnson showed in the game against Notre Dame, the fact that Lander didn't get in that game is pretty damning on Lander. The fact that he couldn't get in, I didn't think that Finney was playing all that well, even though he had 2 threes. He did shoot 2 of 8. Xavier Johnson was 3 of 11. Right, neither of them were shooting very well. I think it's more indicative of his defensive faults than his offensive game, because I do believe that Lander would be a great offensive point guard. But I think Xavier Johnson and Finney just play better on defense, especially Johnson tries his butt off. He might not do the right things all the time, but he is at least trying. And that's fun to watch. I'd rather watch that. Finney, of course, we know is a good defender. Finney's problem is on offense, where he just overthinks everything. So we have a bit of a rough time at the point guard position as when Xavier Johnson's having an off night like he did against Notre Dame.
Well, yeah, there's drastically different styles of play, at least to this point. We're not entirely sure how much of Rob Finney could be his old ways, or if that's how he's going to be the entire season. But that's definitely what we've seen recently. That's definitely how Rob's going to be, at least in the near future, if not for the rest of the season. And it's just super slow and methodical versus just hardcore to the basket the entire time. And you're right, both of those point guard play has not necessarily recently been tip-top shape, and you need good point guard play. As you can tell, the last time the Hoosiers were consistently good was when you had someone like Yogi Ferrell at the helm of the team, and it's just super critical to have for this team. And Xavier Johnson brings that, but just right now it's just super hot and cold, where he brings a lot of energy, he brings a lot of scoring, a lot of assists, but there's moments and lots of moments where it's quite the opposite, where he's throwing up threes and all of the assistant coaches are throwing up their hands. It's like, what are you doing, man? But it's like, hey, I can't really pull him because there's not much of a better option, because like you said, Christian Lander, Twitter's going crazy about it, and there is something, and we don't know Coach Woodson well enough to really question a lot of his stuff yet. So we can kind of have to be like, hey, I trust you. I trust your process. And right now his process is Christian Lander is not doing something in practice to get him time on the floor, whether it is attitude, whether it is his defense, whether it's just whatever it is. And these are just, I was just throwing something out. I have no idea if that's actually what it is or what it isn't, but he's just not doing something to where Coach Woodson and his staff want to put him out on the court, regardless of if he could actually do some minutes, because we all know Christian. I mean, he's still definitely improving, but he could still go out there and give some rest to other guys at the very minimum, and maybe not tank the team. But he's just not doing something. And you can kind of see a little bit of results, because a couple of weeks ago, a week and a half or so ago, Coach Woodson talked about how Anthony Leal was changing something in practice. He had really liked, he really liked what Leal has been doing in practice recently. And his playing time, you will see an increase in his playing time, was the summary of kind of what he was talking about. And lo and behold, Anthony Leal has been playing more minutes the past few games. So whatever this is that this coaching staff wants, they want these guys to be on board with what they're doing. Again, whatever it is, attitude, behavior, playing, whatever it is, they want them to be on board before they start playing. So I'm still not going to judge it. I mean, I'd like to see him obviously get some minutes, but I'm not going to judge the coaching staff just yet. And we're going to give them some time so that we can start developing. You unpacked a lot there. You talked about point guard play. You talked about your quote unquote shooting guard play right there. And then you get into some people like Parker Stewart and Miller Kopp. I think a lot of what Xavier Johnson's faults that we're seeing right now is, of course, the main guy the whole time, no secret, is Trayce Jackson-Davis. But I think Xavier Johnson would be a great third option, where he doesn't have to be, if Trayce is having a bad game, which is going to happen to anyone. LeBron James, Michael Jordan have bad games. Everyone has a bad game. Where Trayce Jackson-Davis has a bad game, it's not going to be all on Xavier's shoulders to find some scoring happening. He needs to be the third option, the go-to third option after Trace, after question mark. And right now we just don't have that person. We got Parker Stewart that'll come in and out where he'll score 5 points or he'll score 6 out of 7 from beyond the arc. You got Miller Kopp that'll score 2 points, and then he'll score 20 points in one game as well. So it's just super up and down. Race Thompson's a guy that's pretty consistent, I would say, at least in the scoring, but he's definitely not a go-to scorer. And then that's it for the starters. There's no one else on the bench. So I think that kind of plays hand in hand with talking about some of Parker Stewart and Miller Kopp stuff, with where Xavier's faults are, which is kind of where the point guard depth and the point guard play is lacking.
Yeah, Xavier goes hunting shots, which is nice when he's hitting.
Yeah.
It's not nice when he's not hitting. And
Right.
I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he played at Pitt. And I mean no disrespect to Pitt fans or the Pittsburgh program, but Pitt doesn't have nearly the caliber of players that IU does. Or has had
right now
since Xavier Johnson has been there. Now you want to talk about in the past, Pitt's been a good program, but right now, especially in the years that Xavier Johnson played there, Pitt has been
the bottom of the ACC.
Yes, bottom of the ACC. So honestly, I think he's just learning how to play with good players, which is part of what happens. You can tell there are games where it clicks and he's just doing everything well and the matchup fits him and he looks like a fantastic point guard and we're all, rainbows and butterflies. And then there's games like the Wisconsin game, especially the second half, because I didn't think he was bad for the first half. It was the second half Wisconsin game where things got tough. He started trying to force things. And he's got to learn that he can't be the guy to force things. He's got to play within himself and let Trace, race, and heck, I'll even give Parker Stewart the ability to do so, which is that they can force things. That's fine. I think the three of them, I think honestly, Xavier Johnson should be the fourth option on this team for scoring.
I'd be fine with that.
If this team, maybe even fifth, honestly, he should, Miller Kopp should be above him. I think Parker Stewart should be above. Race certainly should be above him. That he hasn't missed a shot in 2 games, and then Trace should be above him. I think everybody should take shots in the starting lineup above Xavier, and that was
the problem that no one does that though. Trace is the only one that is willing to step up, at least on the court with getting the ball and scoring. He's the only leader right before Xavier that's willing to do that, which is the problem, at least where some of these scoring droughts is that Parker Stewart's not going to demand the ball. Miller Kopp's not going to demand the ball. Race Thompson at times will demand the ball, but not necessarily consistently. And Xavier's just like, you got to do it.
I think with Xavier, he's going to come a point where he's going to realize that instead of we're at Pitt, he cut with the ball or drove with the ball in order to score. I think he's got to realize that he doesn't need to force that at IU, but instead he needs to force more shot creation, right? He needs to force like an assist. You know what I'm saying? He needs to force a pass. That's what he needs to do, because he's going to get past guys in Big Ten play with his speed and his power. He's going to create opportunities that way. He might not always be able to finish in the paint over those guys like he has tried, especially late in Wisconsin. He tried really hard. But you know what was open in Wisconsin? When they collapsed on him, there were people outside he could kick it to, and it's up to Miller Kopp and Parker Stewart and Race and Trace, the other guys we mentioned before, that when he gets them open shots, they need to take them, and they need to take responsibility for understanding that Xavier's doing what's best for the team in that situation and not forcing him to run and chuck stuff at the backboard.
Now, at least with all of the talk surrounding at least how poorly, or at least maybe not necessarily how poorly, but at least how a lot of the front court people can be, the backcourt people, I should say, could be improving. It's noticeable that when you got a couple of people struggling, now Xavier still scored double-digit figures. Rob had 5 assists in some of the time he played and 5 rebounds as well. So there was a lot of good play. And us talking about at least having a down game for that is somewhat encouraging, at least to where we are at this point in the season, but at least overcoming where Notre Dame got way closer than it should have. Where, like you said, where they tied, the Hoosiers did pull it out, which is something positive in how they are finishing games compared to at least as of recent. Um, a lot of that, of course, coming from those couple of front court players with Trace and Reese. And I think we don't have to necessarily dive too deep into it because it's kind of just like a broken record at this point in a positive way.
Yeah.
Talking about Trace and Race, and I think Race is also, there were a couple games, at least in the middle of the non-conference schedule, where he was a little bit downwards. But I think Race is starting to find his stride with these other backcourt players, since 3 out of the 5 starters this year are different than what they were last year. So I think Race is trying to find that touch, the difference with Xavier, Parker, and Miller Kopp. And I think it's starting to pay off, especially like you said, with not missing a shot in a couple games.
Yeah, it is. Race Thompson is by far our second best player. He's so good at everything he does. I don't want him to force things, but I wish he would demand the ball more because he's a bit of a mismatch nightmare. He'll often get switched on to by guards, and there's no guard that can stay in front of him. Like Kyle Lowry would have to import himself into the college game in order for a point guard or a 2 guard in college basketball to be able to guard Race Thompson. Like, that's just not happening. There's nobody strong enough. There's nobody tall enough, lengthy enough to do so. So I wish he would recognize that, hey, Trace, like, I know it's the Trace show. You get that, and you deserve it. But like, he's got to demand the ball more than 4 shots. Like, how is Xavier Johnson taking 11 shots and Race Thompson's only getting 4? Because Race should be at least averaging 6 to 7 shots a game. Just he's gonna get those opportunities. Now, it's not the prettiest basketball because you give him the ball on the block and then everybody spaces out and you're like, go, which is not exactly the most fun thing to watch, but it works and it wins games, and I hope to see some of it in Big Ten play.
Let's talk about one more aspect of the Notre Dame game before we move on to a couple other things, a little more brief aspects of this show. It's been talked about over Twitter and the Crossroads Classic, where Xavier Johnson, at some points during the game, was getting booed by the fans, and let's talk a little bit about if that was deserved or not. So, what do you think, Matt? How are you taking at least that reaction from the fans when Xavier Johnson was playing like that?
I think that's BS. I think booing our players is terrible, and I know that's a bit hypocritical coming from a Philadelphia Eagles fan, but they're college kids, right? Like, I get one thing, like booing the kids if they like go and do something stupid, like fight the other team, like I get that, but they have the IU jersey on just as much as you have the IU jersey on in the stands. I think it's a really bad look if the transfer kid who's in his like 10th game playing for the program is getting booed. Like, come on now, guys. Like, you can be disappointed with him, but don't boo him. Like,
I totally agree.
If the coaches want to yell at him, that's fine, but don't boo him. Like, it just doesn't make a ton of sense. And it's not something like a recruit or a kid that's just, in his dorm room, right? Could transfer to IU next year as a basketball player, is watching that game and going, why the heck would I even want to play there? If I'm going to go there, I have 1 or 2 bad games, and 10 games in, I'm getting booed by a Bankers Life Fieldhouse. Like, what? I don't understand what
a rabid fan base and
I get wanting to voice your displeasure. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like I'd rather the crowd, like, you hear them grumble about mistakes than boo or go on Twitter. Like, you can be obvious about your displeasure about his play without being rude, and I think booing is rude, and I don't think it was called for.
especially when it's the collegiate level. And there's a
Yes.
reason that the reason that they're called amateurs is because they're not quite professionals yet. Now, obviously, there's a lot of, and I don't mean that in a negative way. So don't
Yeah.
come after me. I just as they're not professionals just yet in the sense of you're not treating them like professionals who are getting who are getting a check in the mail, well, email nowadays, or just straight to your bank account. But they're not getting paid to do this just yet. They're still learning, and I totally agree. Where Woodson called it disturbing, and like you said already, Coach Woodson also said it's like, hey, I'm the person that's going to handle all of that internally. Let me handle
Yeah.
the displeasure with taking care of a player that might be putting up a bad shot. That it's a bad shot. I know it's a bad shot. This player might even know it's a bad shot. Let me handle that. Why don't you keep focusing on just being a fan instead of just, like you said, I think you put it very well. You don't have to be rude about it. You can voice it in other ways, but don't be rude about it. And
Yeah.
it's just such a bad look when, like you said, just someone's turning on the TV and we got this big recruit that's going to come into Assembly Hall in just about a month and a half from now, and they see someone like that, like you said, just having a bad game and getting booed for it, where
Yeah.
it's totally different where maybe in the Archie era, where at the end of a half or at the end of a game, the all-around play was bad, and you're just voicing your displeasure at least for the program itself and where it is. But I don't. It's been a long time since I've seen fans boo a specific player at the college level.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the last time IU fans booed a specific player, and I
I really
actually can't remember a
Me
specific
too.
player. I can remember booing coaches. I can remember booing
Play overall,
overall
yeah, agreed.
play, like
Yep.
like the end of like a 7-minute scoring drought during the archery era would bring out a couple boos, right?
Right.
But I don't think the kids would take that personally. Like that was just specifically directed at Xavier, which is really mean, honestly. And like I'm sure
Yeah.
if you ask Xavier about it, he'd be like, it's fine, like I could take it, which is a good attitude to have about it. But I don't think it's necessary for him to just take it. I don't think that should ever be a thing.
Agreed.
And he should never be in that situation where you're like, well, yeah, you played like crap, but like, and you got booed. But you're supposed to like go out there next week and give it your all for the same people that just booed you. Like
Yeah.
it'd be hard for me to muster up the the desire to do so,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I just wish we would treat people with more respect.
Mm-hmm. Parker Stewart, 46th in the nation for 3-point percentage at 49.1. I didn't exactly count, but roughly 15 or so of those 46 players are Power 5 teams. You always got to count out when you got individual player accolades. Kind of got to take out some of those non-Power 5 or Power 6 with basketball. You got to take out some of those players in those lower conferences, if you will. So it's nice to see, and he's shooting the ball just as much, if not more, than a lot of these people. Seeing like 21 attempts, 30 attempts. He shot the ball 55 attempts at basically a 50% mark, which great on him. Let's move
Yes.
on to who won the week. We're going to go back to some IU football, and I love the podcast from you guys last week. Just get that, just wash that clean this entire season. Just wash it away. Let's get back to some positive IU football news. Let's not lose a lot of that momentum we had. Let's just Michigan State last year, 2020. Let's just say it's like that. We're going to get back to. We're going to be top 10. We're going to go to the college football playoffs next year, Matt. That's how it's going to go. But IU football running back David Holloman, who helped spread Christmas cheer with the toy drive for Toys for Tots. Although it's not through IU, it's still through a family business. So it's really cool to see, especially in a platform with, at least thankfully with all the NIL rules, it's getting easier to accrue money for you to do stuff like that. But especially with the NCAA, with all this red tape here and there for various reasons, it's cool to see that someone like that is able to do things like that for
Yeah.
people in need, because there's always, with the NCAA, there's always like, oh, I'm going to give away toys for charity, and then the NCAA is going to be like, you did something bad somewhere along there, you did something bad. But If you'd like to subscribe to our podcast for free, just search for the Hoosier Sound wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay up to date with all of our information. Follow us on Twitter at Indiana HQ at the Hoosier Sound. And it's good to stay up to date because episodes like tonight, you got a new host, not necessarily going live. Maybe it's all completely new for you, but at least you can follow us, updates and everything. And we like to not post a lot. I know if your Twitter feed gets jammed and it's hard to follow everything. We try not to post too much, but if you enjoy us or show, though, man, it's been a while since we've had a review. Who's going to be the first person to review us in a while? We'll probably shout it out, talk to you, put it out over this, over a podcast and say thank you for that. But tell a friend, share links. All the support is how our podcast reaches more passionate IU fans such as yourself and just gets a lot of positive news with the Indiana football sports programs.
Yep.
I really don't want to linger on this next section too much. I'm just hoping that it's like 2 weeks, things are going back to normal, but I think it's worth mentioning since the next couple of weeks is going to be totally up in the air with whether Indiana basketball, both women's and men's, because we saw the women's team actually just had a postponed / canceled game with the recent COVID-19 surge in all sports, basically. Like you saw the NHL, they're just going on winter break early. They paused and stopped all these games, despite the NFL saying that they're not going to reschedule any games. We had a doubleheader last night during this recording itself. We're all going to congratulate Matt and say, hey, thank you for being on the podcast when the Eagles are actually playing right now.
Yeah, true.
The 2 games as we're recording right now, there's NFL games during our podcast. It's that's crazy. And a bunch of cancellations / postponements. And like you got all of these people like Duke and Wisconsin today saying, hey, this game is canceled. We are looking for a new opponent right now, basically, if we're going to have these opponents. So, I mean, it's just crazy to be talking about all of this COVID stuff again, at least affecting some of these games when we hope that we were kind of through all of it. And I mean, we haven't even talked about bowl game season, which is coming up. Most of the games, I should say, are coming up within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about the college football playoff. Like I saw JT Daniels of Georgia came down with COVID today. And so what does that mean for Georgia when they have the game this weekend? Or I guess what, Thursday or Wednesday or Thursday of next week for whatever New Year's is. And honestly, like that's a bit concerning. And then of course you think about IU sports, right? In the basketball programs, you're like, well, we don't want to forfeit games. We've seen people have to forfeit. I think was it DePaul that had to forfeit.
You mean like they took an L, or they
took an L.
Wow.
Because they had to cancel the game. And because they are the ones with COVID, they took a loss for no reason. So really this year, again, like last year, you're competing against 2 people. You're competing against the other team, and you're also competing against COVID. I don't know what people's opinions are on the vaccines or whatnot. I don't know which one of our players are even vaccinated or not. I don't think that any of that really matters. Like all that really matters is that you don't get sick, don't get your teammates sick. So obviously our guys have been responsible so far, knock on wood. And we'll see what the rest of the year, where that takes us. I'm assuming that there's going to be a bit of a spike here after Christmas, and then hopefully everything dies down again. But
yeah, I mean,
you never know.
Vaccinations aside, we're seeing that this new variant is still running through people who are vaccinated regardless. Now the symptoms are at least a little different if you want to start to get scientific, but it's still a thing. So whether people, regardless of are vaccinated or not, I'm sure. I also feel bad for the players. It's like where they play the game tomorrow and then they're going to be able to go home and see their families for a couple of days. I'm sure the restrictions that the team is going to try and give them, it's like, hey, you're going to be able to go home, but you really can't go out. Your family can't go out because if someone brings this back in, here we go again type of thing. Yeah. So I feel bad for the players not being able to maybe go out and celebrate the holidays like we might, and going to see other family members or extended family members or go away or whatever the case is. So like Nathan wrote for us, some 50 out of 351 D schools have had some initiated game cancellations, and that's as of Tuesday night. I'm sure that number is going to creep up there, basically. So I really hope, hopefully we don't have to keep talking about this. I'm sure we could dive into a bunch of other issues, but let's just hope at least Indiana's not affected, and we can just kind of, like you said, stay in our lane with just keep our team good. Hopefully the other team keeps their stuff good. But let's move on to some other basketball, some social media shout outs. Jawan Morgan, good buddy Jawan Morgan. Not being with the Utah Jazz, at least as of recent. He has signed a deal with the Raptors out of the G League. So he's reunited with OG, which is probably super great for those two guys. I'm sure they're going to be able to maybe not room together like they might have used to. I don't actually remember if they were roommates at some point. I wouldn't have been.
They were definitely buddies. They were in my class.
Definitely buddies, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But that's really cool for him to see, especially a guy like Jawan Morgan, where I hope his NBA career is prolonged as much as possible. Since with professional leagues, it's like everyone always talks about the NFL. The NFL is the not for long league, where it's an average of what, like 2 or 3 years for each
not
player.
Even it's like a year and a half or something. Yeah.
So it's nice to see Jawan extending it, no matter how he's able to extend it, and extend it on a team that's, I guess, still rebuilding, but it's still a quality organization with everything. It's nice to see that. But I know you guys joke that, I mean, Indiana HQ, all of the Twitter, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, but of course it seems like a thing now, Matt, like we're, except Instagram. That's the one thing that we just couldn't get, Indiana HQ. So we're what?
Yep. Indiana.HQ on Instagram.
Indiana.HQ. We're going to go to bed with nightmares with just hearing Matt say Indiana.HQ on a weekly basis. Northern Kentucky, Indiana. At this point, tomorrow night, at this point where the game will probably be over at some point. I'm sure a lot of you don't know much about Northern Kentucky. I was asked to be on this podcast like earlier today, last night, so I have not been able to look up much. But I'm sure I'm not the only person. I'm sure you don't know much about Northern Kentucky. If you didn't grow up in the area, I'm sure you'd be like, Northern Kentucky, that's even a school? I mean, maybe I would assume, because you got like northeast, southwest with all these like Michigan and Kentucky schools, but we'll do a little bit of research for you. So they're not quite as low on the total poll as you might expect. You think Northern Kentucky 4-6. They've lost to some pretty bad teams, like they lost to UNC Greensboro, Western Illinois, DePaul, Cleveland State, IPFW. I actually don't remember if that's the IPFW it is anymore with all their changes too. Eastern Kentucky, all of these losses, they're still a KenPom 194 right now. So they're just above they're just a top 200 team. So when we talk about all these cupcake games and the way Woodson scheduling stuff, it's like, not even diving into scheduling stuff, but let's just give Woodson a year or two, man. Just let him get his players in, and then we'll see where the scheduling goes. You already saw his upgrade from the Crossroads Classic, which actually I'm glad I didn't go on a rant about the Crossroads Classics being done, but thank goodness, Kansas, here we come. But all right, Matt, out of some of your research on how this Northern Kentucky game is going to go, what should we look for as Hoosier fans tomorrow night?
Yeah, there's 3 main guys on Northern Kentucky that we really have to worry about. The first one is Marquez Warwick. Now, Marquez is the 3rd highest minute getter on the team, but the highest points per game. He averages close to 13 points per game. He shoots 31% from 3. He's a guy that likes to get into the lane, to finish through contact. Not the best jump shooter on the team, which I will get to those 2 here very shortly. The second best player on the team is Travon Faulkner, another guard who averages about 12 points per game, averages 36% from 3. He's a better all-around guard. Sam Vincent, who's not one of the 3 I was going to talk about, but I should talk about him since he's the 3rd highest minute getter, or he's the highest minute getter on the team. He's the point guard. He's the go-to distributor of the ball. And finally, Hubertas Pivorius, I think I spelled that correctly, is a 47% three-point shooter on the year. He averages about 10 points per game. So between those 4 guys, they carry the load for basically the entire team. It's a huge drop off to 7 points per game, which I'm assuming is their forward/center. This is a very undersized team. IU should have the rebounding win in this game, advantage and rebounding in this game. They should have the size advantage in this game. And they play a 4-out offense. So again, Race Thompson should have a mismatch every single time down the court. Trace Jackson Davis should have a mismatch every time down the court. I want to see us bury them inside and force them to collapse on us, and then we can kick it out to our really good three-point shooters on the perimeter. I think the one thing to look out for from Northern Kentucky is they shoot 34% from three. And as we've seen before, because it's Assembly Hall, because we are a tortured fan base, these mid-major teams that can shoot the three-point decently shoot it lights out in Assembly Hall when they come and visit us, especially over the breaks. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that IU really needs to make sure they close out to the three-point line this game and force tough shots from Northern Kentucky, because as we know, with Trace Jackson Davis and the way he's been protecting the rim, they're not going to get any easy shots around the rim. So we need to sell out on the three-point shot and force this team into taking tough either mid-range shots or contested shots around the rim.
Yeah, and now granted, they haven't played, was it the highest Ken Palm rank they had played was DePaul, and they lost by, it was 88th at the time, and they lost by 9 points. Yep. Granted, the teams they have played is obviously not quite the caliber of teams that Indiana has been playing, but at least in terms of statistics wise, the Northern Kentucky Norse, they thrive in, they've got a pretty good three-point percentage defense, which will be interesting to see how they go up against a higher caliber team. They are also top 20 in the nation with steal defense. So we just talked about a lot of the guard play earlier today. Let's see how some of those, it's kind of been up and down. I feel like the front court have given a lot of turnovers, and then like the next game, it'll be the opposite, where the backcourt gives a lot of the turnovers. So we'll have to see kind of where the turnover margin goes, which, by the way, Notre Dame, 14 turnovers, much better. We're still, it's like right at the cusp of where Coach Woodson wants. But it'll also be interesting. We're talking about some of the team stuff. 16th of the nation with offensive rebound percentage, which is quite interesting. When you're right, Matt, this is a very undersized team, at least comparatively. So it'll kind of be interesting to see how they go up against Race and Trace. Marquez Warwick. That's basically the name you're going to see, you're going to hear, they're going to talk about, because out of 2,240 players eligible for a national rank, you've got 351 teams times 11, 12, 13. Basically, out of all those thousands of players, Marquez Warwick, out of percentage of shots taken on the team, 42nd in the nation. So he is a guy that basically, like, he shoots a third of the shots. Think about that. Like, out of the shots taken, and it's not even like once every trip, because you could have an offensive rebound and that's a second shot, or a miss and a rebound and that's a second shot. Like, that is him shooting the ball probably almost every single possession that they have, or close to it, at least every other possession. So you're definitely going to see number 3, Marquez Warwick. You're going to see him shooting the ball a lot. And if he gets to the line, he is very good. Like, my wife and I were talking about Trace and some of the stuff he needs to develop to get to the NBA. And one of the first and foremost thing, free throws, man. Free throws. It's like 70, like mid 70s is terrible in the NBA for free throw percentage. And Trace is not even near that. Anyway, speaking of like good free throw percentage, even for college, he's basically at 0.91%, 0.909%, which is really good. It's hard to come by college players that are shooting above 90 in the free throws. So if he gets to the line, watch out. He's going to make a lot of shots, at least from the free throws. Hasn't gotten there very much, though. Only 20 of 22.
But when he's not at the line, he chucks that stuff at the rim. He chucks the ball at the rim more than almost anybody in the country. So, again, forcing him into tough shots, like I said, they probably will not go in. Probably.
Right. Yeah.
Probably.
Ken Palm, 94% chance Indiana to pull this out. They're predicting a 17-point victory for the Hoosiers. I'm sure out of all of the, and I mean non-conference slate is very prime of I want to try this, I want to try that, I want to do this, I want to do that. Let's see how this combination of this and that works, and it's going to be a different result every time. So let's see how Woodson, if he is going to try something different, if he's going to try and narrow things down as we're getting closer to conference play. I'm sure the outcome will still be hopefully a 20 plus point victory, but the way we get there, it'll be interesting to kind of see um, how the Hoosiers get to that. Anything else? Maybe you guys will have something interesting to talk about next Tuesday, since we're in a lull for right. We're in a lull of content right before we get a lot of content. We've got. I want to talk about one more thing before we're headed out. We're on the edge. We're at the very end of our non-conference play. Assumed that of course with some of these more cupcake games with the Hoosiers playing at least Ken Palm ranked 195 Northern Kentucky. Wow, they went down one spot since we started this episode. And then number 259 UNC Asheville. That's probably going to be two more victories, putting the Hoosiers at 11-2. Of course, with the 1-1 split with the Big Ten play in the middle, but 11-2 to kick off our January play going into Big Ten, playing Penn State. So I put a poll out there so we can start talking about all of this non-conference, cleaning that up, moving in to the future. How would you grade the results of IU basketball this season? I gave an A, B, C, D basically with some of it. And Matt, how would you kind of grade, at least as a very general, we're just going to dip our toes into it this week so you guys can talk about it more next week. How would you kind of grade the start that Indiana's had so far?
I mean, to start the year, I said we'd start 9-2, with our only two losses being at Syracuse and at Wisconsin. And guess what? We started 9-2 with our only two losses being at Syracuse and at Wisconsin. So if I had to give it a grade, A, because it's exactly what I predicted. I didn't, it would have been nice if they had gone above expectations and I could have given them an A+. They had went and won one of those games, which both were very winnable. And I think that also factors into my equation. Yeah. It's not like we lost those games by a lot. It's not like we were out of those games. Obviously, the Syracuse game was in double overtime, literally like one less foul on Xavier Johnson, we probably win that game. The same thing, if Xavier Johnson takes one less shot in the Wisconsin game, we probably win that Wisconsin game. So I look at that and I go, like, we're like 3 or 4 bounces away from having a perfect season so far. And for that to be the first 11 games or 12 games of Mike Woodson's tenure, like, you can't really ask for more. So,
yeah. I'm putting the poll out there. A, B, C, D. I kind of assumed that people would say B, just like good, could have gone better, of course. Just obviously, of course, you got 2 losses. You could have had 2 more victories. The way in which those games went down, I'm sure, played a large role into why it's like, oh man, they were just a couple of possessions away. From literally both games combined, a couple of possessions away from being 11-0. But 13-0 if you count the next 2 conference games. But 79.6. We're almost at 250 votes in less than an hour, which is really cool. I at least hear how many votes come in early, and there's a lot of votes that have come in early for this, and 79.6%, a vast majority have said B, and I probably agree with that, just because the collapse at Wisconsin was just, and I'm sure if that record didn't exist against Wisconsin, I'm sure people might be switching their answer more toward A, probably, if that was just not a heartbreaker, like, oh, we could finally get this off our back, right? Yeah. That type of thing. But just the collapse that happened, and a couple more shots for Syracuse, I'd probably agree with B. Max on Twitter said, I said B because this team has shown a lot of potential, but they had to clean up a few minor things like turnovers, and always check your typos, shot selection, but that was not typed out. Like turnovers and shot selection. So, and I think that's a great way to sum it up, to be very honest. There's a lot of potential there. some minor things to clean up, but that's what a new coach, new system, new set of players is. Coming together basically is just some minor that's where you want to be going into conference play. Minor things, lots of potential. That's what you want going into some more consistent caliber of teams. 8.5 said A, which is kind of where Matt was. It's like a lot of it's probably more of the like you were thinking, new coach. This is going great, at least for a new coach. I mean, it really is. Like new coach, usually you expect a very big drop off as things start to rebuild. So I would agree. 11.1 said C. Don't know if I'd agree with that. That's like average. And it's like those expectations for 11 and 2 being average. Don't know. But then 0.8%, and I almost didn't even include this, but 0.8% said D. I want to hear what your thoughts are as to why the season's already started out as a D. It's like, are we trying to be UCLA?
That's the people are super disappointed that
right.
That we trying to go 2 games,
trying to go dozens and dozens of games without losing, like UConn or UCLA back in the day. Is that what our expectation is right now? But yeah, let's wrap it up there.
Let's do it.
That's a good. Yeah, it's been a minute since I've been here, so thank you for bearing with me with all of this. But let's get to wrap it up for our 231st show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Really appreciate your support, especially in various ways. I really hope all of you have wonderful holidays. At least our episodes aren't going to be messed up with this, since right smack dab in the middle is all of those major holiday stuff. So we'll be back here next Tuesday, ready to go. To hear more fantastic episodes like the one you heard today. I hope it's fantastic. Be sure to follow at Indiana HQ so you don't miss any of the future. Go to our website, indianahq.com. All of it's there right in one place. We've got an article posted every time, everything you need to know, where you want to find the podcast, et cetera, et cetera. Go check it out. Lastly, though, if you enjoy our show, like we said earlier, leave a review. Tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps grow this podcast so we can reach all of those passionate IU fans such as yourself, because that's why you're here. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Peace and love. Go Hoosiers.